Kelly, this meeting is going to be recorded?
That's correct. I just hit the record.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So we've got a pretty packed agenda here tonight, as usual. And I'm not going to read off everything here because everybody should have gotten this Friday and then again yesterday with the slides. Is there anything missing from here that we need to make sure that we get on the agenda? All right. Well, hearing nothing there, I think what we will do is kind of launch right into this. And first thing we want to do is welcome a new member. And Joe from Ann Arbor, if you want to just introduce yourself here, I'd appreciate that. I know everybody would like to meet you.
Oh, hi, everybody. I thank you to accept me as a new guy here. I told Steve that my qualification is I am drinking that water that has those funny alphabets. So I'm kind of qualified to be a citizen who is drinking that water. And I'm sure they're doing a good job. But anyway, I like to contribute anywhere I can for the group in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome. And also, we wanted to mention we've got one registration I need to get in process, Troy from Montague. And I think probably even equally as important, if not more, is, as all of you know, that I am going to be retiring at the end of this month, March 31st. And Abby Hendershot, who's with us here tonight, many of you met her at the last meeting, if not before. She's awesome. She's going to be taking over the reins of MPART. And so, Abby, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to introduce yourself to the group as well.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, last month, Steve invited me to make a presentation, and this month he invites me back to take over. So you got to be careful with Steve. You never know what he's going to do to you. So yeah, as the slide says, I'll be starting officially on April Fool's Day. And hopefully we won't fool around too much, but my qualifications, familiar with a lot of you guys through the Pfas work that we've done in the Grand Rapids District Office. So I am the, Grand Rapids District Supervisor for the Remediation Redevelopment Division. I've been with the department since I actually started as a student back in 1988 and then worked my way up from the lowly girl at the bottom all the way up through project management and assistant district supervisor, and then just took this big leap to try to fill Steve's big shoes. So appreciate the welcome and all the kind words that you guys, a lot of you have already sent to me. So I will be leaning on you heavily in the weeks to come, but really excited for the opportunity. So thanks.
Thank you, Abby, and welcome. And all right, so prior meeting recap. And just really quick, last time when we met, we had Lorraine Allen come and give us her perspective from a citizen in an impacted community in another state, and give us some of her insight as well into what she understands how things are going here. So I think she did a really good job, had some nice dialogue there. Then we invited Josh Mosier, the Assistant Division Director from our Remediation and Redevelopment Division, to provide an update on where we are in the development of the groundwater cleanup criteria under Part 201 for those other 5 PFAS compounds beyond the PFOA and PFOS. Some really good questions on timelines and deadlines and whatnot. So I hope that was useful to everybody as well. I have a hard time understanding how that process works under Part 201, and so we really appreciated him coming in and talking with us. And then I think the other thing just to highlight is, and one of the things that we'll have some additional follow-up discussion here tonight, is the PFAS sites web strategy that Abby Hendershot presented to us last time, and then we've had some follow-up discussions since then. And so really, we don't have a lot of slides for this, just a couple. And but this is really just kind of a summary. And Abby, I don't want to, step over you. If you wanted to talk a little bit about this and kind of just, set the stage again for where we are in this and where we might want to go. And even that, some of that kind of comes off of the discussions we had in the subcommittee too. So we might be able to meld all this together.
Yeah, so, we had a particular plan in mind last month that we've gotten a lot of feedback from people, very passionate feedback, and appreciate that, because if there were certain things that weren't clear or that were going to cause controversy or miscommunication down the line, we don't want that. So given all of that, we've kind of come up with a couple of ideas that we think will kind of simplify things. One is that, we're still going to have the PFAS sites and the areas of interest. We're going to meld them into one list so that it's much easier to find. You're not having to search for the areas of interest. And so the tiered approach, though, that we had talked about last month is really going to just get taken off. We're not going to put tiers on that list. We'll still have a list like you see here, like is on the MPART list right now. It'll still have the drop down. It'll still have a site lead name number, which I think is super useful for any average homeowner who wants to figure out what's going on and wants to call somebody. And then we're still deciding on the site or AOI, making sure we got enough room for that particular category. But we'll have this information there, and then you'll have the opportunity to know how frequently that web page is going to be updated. So if you click on the hot link for the Muskegon County Landfill Type 2 hot link there, then you could go to that page and see how frequently it was going to get updated, which was kind of the basis for how we were trying to do this tiered approach, was to try to make sure that we were transparent in how often these pages were going to get updated. But I think we'll simplify it and try to take some of the unnecessary confusion out of it. And so we're gonna scrap that whole tiered process out of it, but then still assign either a high significant interest type of, or high public interest site would get the most frequent updates. So that site might be listed as a quarterly update. A site that's doesn't have as much data coming in might be getting twice a year, and then yearly for some of the other sites. And so that's kind of where we're at. What else did I forget, Steve? Seems like there was something else we wanted to add on that.
I think you've explained it really well, kind of where we are, given some of the input that we've received. And again, that backstory of, and you did an excellent job, Abby, of trying to consolidate some input both from some state staff and your groundwater work group, and then the subcommittee here from the COG, and come up with more of an administrative step. And but I think everybody's got to agree that it's caused some confusion, and that's not going to be helpful. If we've got confusion in this group, that's definitely not going to help us with the general public, who's not as familiar as you all are. So I think, again, we're relying heavily upon the input of you all as one of our advisory committees, as we try to decide how to continue to improve what we're doing, being transparent, and also utilizing our staff to the best way. And so I think as well, Abby, the whole concept of the site, and how we determine an MPART site, that conversation, and many of you may have seen an email that I had sent out last night, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with what was proposed last time, is we weren't really proposing to change how we designate an official MPART site. But from those conversations that we've had over the past couple of weeks, it became clear that we always need to emphasize that MPART's investigations are not limited to the groundwater investigations that reveal PFAS sites, that we also have investigations of drinking water that Ian Smith is going to be talking about that in a little bit, as well as all of the work that's being done in surface water, whether it's the wastewater industrial dischargers, and the ambient monitoring and even the testing of fish. That we've got that three-prong approach for water in Michigan, very holistic and comprehensive. This is a very significant piece of it. It's not limited, though, to just what we have in official MPART site designation. So I think this is a positive move forward. And, and maybe this is an opportunity here too, Abby, if you think it's a good time, as perhaps AJ can talk a little bit as well, because we just had the subcommittee that, take a look at this whole, effort as well. And AJ, if you don't mind chiming in with your update from your work group, I think it's very timely right here.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
Sure. And I think that Abby already did a pretty good job of kind of summarizing some of the concerns that were expressed and how we might address them. I think that, basically the table of tiers was intended to just be essentially a schedule for updating of this particular website. So it was very limited, but by placing it in as the dominant form of text that appeared when you hit on site investigations, it elevated it to an interpretation that it could be a system that was being used to allocate resources overall to particular sites. And it was never really intended to be that way. So I think in conversations at the subcommittee, as Abby said, we're just going to take off the tiers completely. And what we may replace it with is a live link that when you link on there, it says, this particular site is updated quarterly or semi-annually or annually, or when we get new information, so that that information is still there to let people know what I think is an important piece of information. With respect to areas of interest versus the PFAS site list, I think that combining those and no longer distinguishing them when you're looking for a site is very important, because I know there's some locations that I'm working with that when you went on the site and looked under PFAS sites, they just didn't appear, and that's because they were under a completely separate tab. But if it took me a while to find that out, it probably took most people a while to find that out, if they found it at all. So I think that's very useful to combine that. But we still have the fundamental question, and I want to pose it to the entire COG. We have, obviously some of the sites where there's a number of private drinking water wells impacted, and those are still our highest priority. But on the other end of the spectrum, what do we do when there's one or two homeowners that might have, for whatever reason, gotten their wells tested and there was a PFAS hit or two PFAS hits? Are we to treat them as the source of contamination and potentially single them out and the negative connotations that go along with that? Or are we going to use that as a basis to conduct further investigation? And how do we balance the desire to notify perhaps the neighbors to those hits, to those locations, to those property owners, that they may want to get their water tested without creating concerns? And so I guess I pose it to the entire COG. What would be a way to address a single private drinking water hit with no known source, as far as when on the timeline do we reach out to neighbors, and how do we do that, recognizing that there's currently no system in place to do that? And it's not an easy answer, and it's something that I think we would all benefit from thinking about. And so I kind of pose that as a question to the general COG.
Well, before we go too far with that, AJ, I think there is an internal system that deals with it. It's not as evident on this MPART website, but there is a system that deals with it. When we get a notice of a private drinking water well that has got, exceedance of criteria for PFAS on it, that's something that we do follow up on, and we're working in the districts to try to put those pieces of the puzzle together. So we'll take a location that somebody's either given us their own private well data, or we've gotten it as part of an investigation or whatever, and we're going to start piecing it together with what do we know around the area, what other kinds of geological information do we know, what other contaminants do we know, does it fit as part of an existing investigation that we've already got on our radar, or is this something completely different? And then it would work its way through that process so that at the same time we're investigating the contamination, we might have DHHS or local health reaching out to actually address the homeowner to see what they've got in place to make sure that they're not continuing to be, adversely impacted while that investigation activities go on. So there's those kinds of things happen, right at the ground level. On a pretty daily basis for all kinds of contaminants, not just PFAS. And we've got some of those systems that are already built into our structures. But to your point, AJ, that kind of stuff doesn't always end up on this website as it wouldn't be an area of interest if we don't have a huge source, or if we don't have a large number of collection. We wouldn't want to single out somebody's house as an area of interest or as an MPART site. So I think there's some, gathering of information that goes on before we actually make those determinations.
And thank you for clarifying that, Abby. I didn't mean to imply that that Eagle or MPART was just sitting back doing nothing in situations like that. But, there is a period of time during which you're investigating things. And I guess my question is, when on the timeline do we notify, not only the well that had the hit, if it's part of an investigation, but neighbors, because we have, seen examples of, ranging from, folks that have continued to be exposed nearby. And in hindsight, it would have been nice to let them know earlier, as well as, responsible parties who, could potentially use the area of interest moniker of saying, oh, look, it's not even a PFAS site yet, and kind of hide behind that. So those are both concerns, and I don't think we have answers, nor will we get those answers tonight, but those are exactly the kind of questions that I think, this Citizens Advisory Work Group is, qualified to think about and to offer opinions. And so that's what I was kind of trying to put out there today.
Thanks, AJ. And I see, Daniel, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think that's well said, AJ, on all fronts. I think this website format, and certainly giving the areas of interest, in the same list, same spot, same part of the website with, what we're calling the PFAS sites. I think that makes perfect sense. All the, concerned parties are going to be looking at that page, not, particularly interested in what the name of those things are, but how it relates to them. In terms of the viewing this from a communications issue regarding what the progression would be from a residential well hit, and then how that fits into a process. Abby, thank you for sort of reminding us all that there are processes that are followed for those kind of things. What I suspect might happen, just as a hypothetical in the future to get us all thinking, is as we start looking at biosolids and other truly non-point source types of contamination, and as we start looking at other avenues of contamination away from what we're already thinking about, it is very possible that we could have somebody test their well and it comes back with a really high number, and then I think a logical next step would be to test it again to make sure it's not a false positive. And then, at some point you realize that there is something there. and trying to figure out what that is. If it's a septic tank or, something like that, then, the neighbors next door might want to know. So the communication challenges of sorting all that out, I feel is something that we can help with, as much as it fits into the overall process. I do just want to, on the note on the tiers, I think, AJ, you made a good point. Anytime we introduce a name for something, if in this context we're really talking about just the update schedule for the website, it could just be a tab or a column on the table that just says update schedule. If that's what we're really interested in terms of the website. So just throw that out there that, rather than creating a name and a classification where we can just have a quick description, that makes sense too.
Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. And I see Connie, you've got your hand up, and then Pam.
Okay, just a couple of quick things. Instead of saying area of interest, my mind automatically goes to areas of concern, like the Detroit River, the Rouge River. Why not just simply say what it is? An active site investigation. Why use confusing terms, area of interest, when you can just say active site investigation? That's what it is. Okay, that's one point. And then the second point that I have, and I really need clarification on this. Now, is PFAS actually a Part 201 site? We always say PFAS site. We're always referring to it that way. But isn't it really a Part 201 site? Because after all, you're exceeding generic residential and non-residential cleanup criteria. So why do we kind of fool around with that? Shouldn't it just be part of the Part 201? Or why are you separating it? And then last question, is PFAS by EPA a listed hazardous waste?
All right, so in reverse order, EPA does not regulate any PFAS as a hazardous substance or as a hazardous waste constituent. So that's one of the things that's kind of on their schedule, is to look at listing them as hazardous substances first under CERCLA, which would mean they'd have to be evaluated under CERCLA type cleanups, which would be pretty huge. I think everybody would agree that's a positive step, but hazardous waste designation, that's, I think, way off in the future. Once they figure what sort of waste management infrastructure need there's going to be for these materials, because again, they are in so many things. A lot of consumer products that end up in a solid waste landfill that's not subject to hazardous waste regulation, right? So that the other question, as far as using areas of interest versus some other designation, that's something we can look at, and this is an evolving process. If there's ways to improve that, I'm not so sure what is the best way to do it. And I think what's most important is getting the information out there to the public to show that this is an area where we're doing some work. And I agree, Connie, that areas of concern is not the right term, because then I think we're going to create a lot of confusion out there with the area of concern designation in the Great Lakes. That could be problematic. Yeah. And then Abby, do you want to talk a little bit about the Part 201 facility?
Sure. So yeah, Connie, you're exactly right. If you have an exceedance of a PFAS criteria, you do have a Part 201 site. And so it is 201 encompasses a lot of different contaminants, which, I think that on our list right now, there's over 307 different contaminants that could potentially be exceeded to make something a Part 201 site. People don't know what that means, and for our context, it's much easier for us to say it's a PFAS site. I think the general public understands what that means, and so I think that's why you've got that designation. A Part 201 site is more of a regulatory term that we normally use. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And then Pam.
Um, I'd like to just kind of point out a few things. We have a woman from our area who has elevation of PFAS in her well, in her body. And of course, I know Gail and I, down here in this region, we try to direct people to the MPART site. I think AJ makes a good point about we need to make the website navigational friendly, but I think the terminology on it as well needs to be in layman's terms. I think, the response that I get back from people from our area is that they don't understand what does that mean? If my neighbor has a detect, but I don't, they don't understand that. And I know that initially the question was brought up is to when do we say something, to the neighbors, if there's been a detect. But I think before we do that, I think there has to be some type of education to them. What is the protocol? Once PFAS has been detected in your area or at your home, what is the protocol for that? In layman's terms. And I don't know how the other COG members feel about that, but I think if we can simplify it, the residents they're not scientists. They don't understand this. And I hear that repeatedly.
Thanks, Pam. And you're kind of leading us into, I think, the next part of the agenda as well. So good segue.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts on this tiered approach before we move into more of the outreach to residential well owners piece? All right. We can probably go to the next slide. And again, I think Abby and I'll kind of tag team on this one. But there's been, some concern over the timing of outreach that MPART does to communities when we're actually starting investigations. And we had the East Bay Township example where, the MPART Eagle asked the airport and also the Coast Guard to look at whether or not they had any contamination on site because, using the types of products that contain PFAS, it's possible. And if they did have contamination, it's also possible that it would migrate off-site and impact some residential wells and Grand Traverse Bay. And so we did that in February and then ultimately decided because they couldn't move forward quickly enough to get some results. In fact, those results are just now coming in from the airport and the Coast Guard. Eagle went ahead and actually did some investigations in a right-of-way just off-site of those properties, found some high results, worked with local health and state health to get the residents on alternate water until, fortunately, what is now a more permanent solution is being installed in those neighborhoods right now for about 18 residential well owners. So it's a good news story. I know there's some, questions, concerns on timing. And so we had a conversation with Ken Harvey's subcommittee just before this meeting tonight on, that's our current model is not to notify residents unless we actually have a result. And I mean, we've got a lot of suspicions around the state of potential contamination, and sometimes those suspicions don't lead to any finding of any contamination. Sometimes they do. And we're learning a lot as we go forward, and that's helping to refine where we start looking. But again, right now in these protocols, we've actually, reviewed with this group going back, over a year, saying, okay, well, here's when we get a result, and this is what we do with it as far as reaching out to local units of government. And then if it's something that might require us to look off-site for potential residential well impacts, doing the town hall. And obviously, there's some adaptations of that model. If we get a really strong high hit and residential wells are close, we may do like we did up in East Bay Township and just get bottled water out to them right away before we ever, hold a town hall and actually get results from their wells. So, but again, I think I'll give Abby a chance to chime in here as well. We started a conversation with Ken's group, and then maybe Ken can chime in as well on what are some alterations of our model that might work for everybody as we go forward. So Abby, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm gonna let Ken and Sandy talk because I think they're gonna say pretty much what I'm gonna say anyway. So Ken, you want to start?
Yes. Yeah, we had a very good discussion about this issue because it was our #1 item on our agenda in this particular location. But before I get into that, I welcome anyone on this meeting, during this meeting, to come join us in this committee, because there's a whole lot of better information that we can glean from more people, because we don't have all the answers, but we know when we see an issue like East Bay, we lived it here in Belmont and in Rockford, not knowing for a while, and after it became evident it was an issue. So what we want to do is work with MPART and do everything we can to find, and with community health, find ways that we can get the information out there that doesn't panic the public, because that can happen. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, and we know, because we've been living this for 3.5 years, we know an awful lot about this stuff. But the people who might get some mailing or might get some information from the newspaper, they really don't know. They don't know how fearful to be. But to Steve's point, if we have an indicator, we need to get good drinking water to them right away. We don't need to talk about you can't bathe your children. And one thing we didn't bring up in the meeting was we have to look at what the state has to look at, what wells might be impacted in the area. But there may be, in a situation like East Bay, wells that were never capped, that aren't being used for everyday use, but they could still be being used for livestock feeding, watering, and we need to get into those areas as well. So there's a lot of work we have to do, but we are asking for anyone else to join us, because like I say, the meetings are at 5 o'clock before this meeting and are open to anybody that wants to join. So I'm going to hand it off to Sandy, because she's got more personal information to share.
Well, I'm not sharing personal information. That sounds like a different group that I would belong to. But anyway, no, I just want to, I think as a community member, and I think my neighbors would probably agree that as soon as you are investigating, I would want, and I think most people would want, to just know that there's an investigation. And I think there are ways that we can talk about how to mitigate the panic, though I truly do question if there's actual panic in the streets and people setting their hair on fire. There is anxiety. Of course, there's anxiety. You run the possibility that your groundwater is contaminated. So that's reasonable and understandable. But to allow this to go on for months and months and not notify people, I feel like it's just wrong. It's just ethically wrong to do. So I think we need to work with you guys on helping you come up with a way to notify people in a way that gives them the needed information, lets them then make the decisions they need to, until more information can be found. So I just feel very strongly about that. And I'm assuming any community member that's been contaminated by anything, not just PFAS, probably feels the same way.
Mm-hmm. So I'll jump in, Sandy, thanks. I would really encourage that, as Ken said, to join this subcommittee, because I think this is going to be the next really big topic for the state is how do we, reach out to, how do we improve the existing process for outreach and communication before, during, and after an investigation? How do we keep that going so it's seamless, so people feel like they know what's going on and they don't have a reason to be afraid, but they're informed? But then to the greater community across the state, how do we reach out to all the residential well owners across the state about the responsibility of being having their own residential well, and about the potential concerns that could be out there, whether or not they live in an old farm field, or they live next to an abandoned dump, or they live in, downtown Traverse City. Those are all have a different set of potential risks. But there's some really good information out there. And I think that that's a communication piece that I'd love to see the CAG really get into, or COG get into, and see how we best message that out on a long-term ongoing basis. So hence the opportunities there that's on the slide.
Thanks, Abby. And any questions, thoughts on this from other members of the group? All right. Well, again, I see a hand. Dan.
Hello. Hello.
Hi there. Whoops.
Yeah,
Hi,
go
this
ahead, Dan,
is,
and then Stacy.
Yeah, this is Dan Threlny, Environmental Health Director up in Grand Traverse County, and was involved with the East Bay Township site and some of the concerns from the residents that just were brought to light about the delay in notification. And I just, there's a few little misconceptions with that, just that there was contamination known, I think is what, and I've gotten some feedback about that. And I just want to make that clear that that wasn't the case at that site. It was more or less because it's a big regional airport and the possibility of those compounds being used there, there was definitely high potential. And I think maybe that somehow has to be a matrix of some sort, or some way of scoring these sites. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but when you have sites of really high potential, maybe that should be considered as far as notification of residents beforehand, before we have data. And this one was really unfortunate because of some of the delays that happened. They were beyond everybody's control because of, it was kind of coincided with the pandemic hitting and things of that nature. So, I think in most cases that a delay of 8 months is definitely not standard. It was unusual because of those issues. So I'm hopeful that, other sites, we're not experiencing things like that at other sites. And I just want to know that everybody to know that, everybody involved, state, local, partners, have worked really hard on that site to get those folks connected to municipal water and really have the long-term solution. But I also really understand the residents, the 18 that were drinking the water, their concerns. Of course, hindsight is a valuable thing to look at, but yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be a better way and some consideration on how we look at these in the future. Absolutely.
Agreed. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Appreciate you finding
Hello?
those 18 wells. Yes, Stacy, you're next.
So actually, can you hear me?
Okay, it sounds like a very weird recording. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we're here in Holly on Falk Road. So we're dealing with an old abandoned landfill. It was unlined. It's a very complicated geology. We actually have a cross-sectioning going on by a retired DEQ giving us the geology so we can understand the groundwater flow. Currently, RRD is on site the last 2 days and are supposed to be the next 2 days. We now know there's 35 wells and it's not 11 on this 40-acre site. So they aren't testing all of them and they're retesting some of the ones that already came back with PFAS, one at 31 parts per trillion instead of 6, which is the legal limit. Where we're stuck right now is two things. One, we have a class 1 community well that's under 2,000 feet from this facility, and we have big concerns with the water supply permit, and that 919 was checked no on that. We have some complication on what's going on with that. We've got some big concerns with that. But now we're trying to notify some of the wells that are showing with the groundwater flow that we understand that they might have concerns, and we have started a GoFundMe to start testing some of these homes because folks are getting sick. We're about 3 years in on this at this point, and yes, COVID kind of stuck us with a slow up too, but we're trying not to panic the people like your guys are talking about. But like even today, I'm getting questions. They're like, you know, how do we know that we're safe? And at this point, we don't have an answer to give them because we're still a year since they started testing for the first time in 25 years. And in those 25 years, there's a lot of folks that have had issues. So I'm super grateful for this, and I am enjoying the fact that we're going to have a subcommittee to work with. But this one here in Holly, it's somewhat preventable, foreseeable, and we need this group, Eagle, and everybody that can assist us to make sure that this goes right. That is said to be a sole source aquifer needing to be designated, and there's a sand seam connecting the dump and the manufactured home park with 192 homes moving in directly across as quickly as they can. At this point, they're slowed up a little bit. And I know I just completely rambled on that, and I did not finish that the way I wanted to. And my dog's barking, so I will sign off.
Thank you, Stacy. And Sandy, you think your hand went up?
You know I can't do these hand things right. I just consider me waving again.
All right, we're waving back at you. Thanks, Sandy. And Bill Barnett.
Thank you. I was just going to circle back to the, excuse me, the East Bay issue. I was curious what information was known back in February and why the residents are so outraged about the 8-month delay. They're mad about information known in February. I'm sorry, I have laryngitis, but I wrote out a little question on my comments. I wondered if someone could provide the lead up and background just so everybody knows what happened. And because there was a disappointed crew that lives there in the community. And of course, the media has been following this closely. And it looks to be not handled properly. And I'm hoping this committee could give some input and advice. I know there's been some comments made that sound positive, but I've just wondered how this happened and why that the testing at the homes they didn't just start with testing at the homes that were right in the underground water, the direction of the flow, and that the matter could have been dealt with within a month or so and got much quicker testing done and temporary water while it was looked at. I don't know the entire background, but there seems to be an outrage about it, and this is exactly what our committee wants to, excuse me, help the Eagle Group to ensure that the public has a trust in our community and community environmental leaders. Summarize what happened leading up to it and why I understand there's a delay with COVID and so forth, but why the information that was known and what was known at the beginning and why that wasn't just notified why notice wasn't given to the residents that were right there and work backwards to the source to start with the residents first because they had immediate needs that weren't met. And I'm concerned that was a backwards approach and that we can do better than that. And if that's our policy, I think it should be changed. Thank you. And thanks, Steve, for everything you've done for this group as well.
Yeah, and you're welcome. And thank you, Bill. Appreciate your comments. And, I think, the short of it is that, the timing was delayed for several reasons, and we didn't actually have offsite data before we contacted residents to say that we wanted to sample their wells. And, not to overly defend, that's the model we've used across the state, for the past 3 years. And now what we're talking about here is, are there ways we can improve? And so there's a couple of things, one of them working with, Ken's subcommittee and coming up with a way to do some outreach, a plan to change our protocols for outreach. And when we're actually in a community looking, but then Abby also chimed in that maybe there's something we should be doing for residential well owners. There's a million of them out there that may never be part of an investigation overseen by MPART. They may not have a PFAS site near them. They may not be subject to any risk of PFAS, but there's a number of other contaminants that they should be aware of, and opportunities to actually pursue water sampling, water testing, and who they might want to talk to once they get a result. So I think there's a couple of things, and this also, I think, really links nicely with what we've been working on. John Esch came into this group, I think, a couple of months ago and demoed for Kalamazoo County that GIS web app that we would like to work on for statewide to give residents an opportunity to put a address into this web app and then get an idea based upon groundwater flow and GIS overlays of a number of different potential or known PFAS sources, so they can make a well-informed decision on whether or not they might want to get a test done, and then where they might look to get that done and who they can talk to about results. So I think we've got a multi-pronged approach here to see if we can do things better and get notice out to people sooner, especially if there's delays in getting results from an investigation, which, as Dan pointed out, isn't typical. But for a number of different reasons, it happened that way this time. So, all right. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Some good opportunities here. Stephanie.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say there's somebody who's at a 231 area code who's been trying to speak, and I think she's on a phone, so maybe not raising her hand. And yeah, there she goes. Are you, sorry, I just wanted to draw attention to that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Is there somebody on one of the 231 numbers trying to speak?
Is this, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Hillary. I'm an East Bay Township member. I'm actually one of the homes that was impacted by the PFAS. I have the second worst well in the township. I am one of the people that, as was forementioned, that seemed to be outraged by the 8-month gap of when the airport was first being told that there was going to be, that they should investigate that there might be a potential PFAS contamination. In that letter, it stated that there were potentially 20 private wells that could be terribly impacted by that if there is an issue. Those 20 homes, I do strongly feel, should have had the option. We have tests for tornadoes. Why? To give people a heads up. We have tests for hurricanes for the same reason. If I heard of somebody that I cared about or somebody that I know, was going to be shot with a gun, I would give them a heads up. Yes, that's a drastic difference from PFAS. But my next door neighbor that had the worst well in the entire subdivision had 2 small children under the age of 7. And every doctor, I worked at the hospital, every doctor I have spoke to and friend that knows about PFAS has told me they are the worst impacted. That was 8 months. She could have had an option to protect them and prevent them from bathing, drinking, whatever, just an option. We're smart people. You could have sent us a letter that said, hey, we're investigating the airport due to Governor Whitmer wanting, because of Flint and other areas, we're reaching out to all airport areas, anybody that may be on a private well, to investigate. We're not going to panic, but at least we could have had a 4 option to say, hey, I want to stop drinking my water just in case. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, the state of Michigan, as far as I'm concerned, there should be a standard. If you're buying a home, if you're on a private well, they need to be notified, hey, it's an extra charge for PFAS, but you might want to consider it. You know, that should be a standard. The electric's a standard. Everything else is a standard because we can't see PFAS and we don't know if we're ingesting it. It just doesn't seem like a standard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's that I'm not saying that sending out a letter is going to wouldn't cause a panic, but I'm saying it would give us an option. People are going to take things however they want. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in right now.
Right.
You know, but that's so.
No, hey, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And, you know, we apologize for, you know, the timing of all of this. And I think you can hear from the Citizens Advisory Work Group here now is we're going to try to come up with several different ways to make sure that we get that notice out in the future to communities as we start doing investigations, and that we do it in a thoughtful way. Like Sandy mentioned, that's a really good point. And to your point on testing for PFAS, you know, when there's property transfers and whatnot, that's another big policy decision that I think we need to look into. I think New Jersey now requires that, and I think Laureen, who was with us last month, talked about some of the work they're doing with that out in New Hampshire. So I think that is an important policy question that we need to look at when there's property transfers, new wells installed, and you know, what are the ramifications of that? Really good point. So thanks for bringing that up.
Well, and Michigan's one of the biggest agricultural states, you know, in Traverse City, you know, we're the cherry capital of, you know, everywhere. It's like, you know, old farm countries tended to use chemicals that could have caused that and other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so I do greatly appreciate you guys taking the time to hear me out and doing what you're doing and trying to change the standard and making it safer for people.
You bet. You bet. Thanks again for joining. And I see a couple other hands are up. Daniel?
Yeah, so yeah, I appreciate the perspective of that last person who spoke. I didn't catch your name, but thank you for your perspective on that and being right in the fray. You know, one thing as we're talking about this, particularly the issue around private well owners, and you know, so there's the needs for notification and you know, like I said, giving people the option and the information to make a decision. Yeah, I think that's a good thing for us to think about. But I also wonder, for those of us that are working with community leaders and residents, you know, about what they can do on residential wells. You know, somebody mentioned earlier, you know, what are the responsibilities, and the best practices that people on residential wells can follow. And I feel like getting our heads together for, you know, what do we want to tell residents when they come to watershed groups or other environmental groups about what they should do. You know, there's some things I would tell all of my friends to do, or if I knew, you know, that there was you know, legacy contamination in a broad area, there's some, you know, basic steps I would tell people to take. You know, I'd tell people to get a well test when they're buying a home, and just include that, you know, within the negotiations for the home. You know, so what are the steps and things we should tell private well owners to do? What are the testing facilities that are available? All that information is out there, but I feel like if we coordinate, you know, a messaging campaign over the next several months, I feel like we can help spread the word on that, you know, there is this responsibility if you own your own well. I feel like we can accomplish a lot with that. All right, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Daniel. And Charlie?
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I've got a question, and it may be something that's well known to everybody else, but I'm up in the Traverse City area, and I looked on the members list tonight and saw me, myself, and I, and no other names. And it prompted me to wonder if there's any mechanism by means of which people who are interested in a particular area or live in a particular area with PFAS related contamination can be aware of one another. I just became aware of 5 minutes ago of one other person who's in this area in the impacted neighborhood, one of the impacted neighborhoods. And so does MPART do anything to facilitate the awareness and connection of people such as myself and the other caller? That's my question. Thank you. I'll go offline and listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And if you're both members of the Citizens Advisory Work Group, that makes it real easy. But beyond that, through like up in East Bay Township, for example, I think we've done a number of town hall updates and whatnot, and we try to make sure that we put the plug in for anybody who's interested in being a member of the Citizens Advisory Work Group to just send that registration form in, and we'll make sure that we get that processed. And then when we get more than 2 people per community, if you saw the charter, it says it's limited to 2 people per community, but we don't turn anybody away. If someone wants to keep up with what's going on in the Citizens Advisory Work Group, that's a lot of those people you see in that optional line on the meeting invitation, who they may not be a official member of any particular community, but they are staying engaged. So those are just a couple of the things we're doing, and that could be helpful as well.
Steve, I'll add in to follow up on that is that in some particular larger communities where you've got, multiple phases of groundwater sampling or ongoing investigation, there are some MPART distribution lists for specific areas. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not, and maybe Randy or one of our other staff members on the line can tell me whether or not there's a distribution list that's been set up for East Bay Township. But I know for Cascade in and around Grand Rapids, we've got a couple different distribution lists set up to keep those people informed of investigation activities, meetings coming up, other things. It's not necessarily a piece where they can email back the whole group, because there's no way to see everybody that's on that list. But I know they already have their own neighborhood associations that they email around. So it's more of a information piece, less the connection piece, as I think you were asking about.
Thanks. And Charlie, did you have a follow-up on that? I saw your hand go back up.
Sorry, I was muted there. I don't know the name of the person who spoke this evening about East Bay, and I'm not sure if they know my name. As far as my name appearing on the member of the work group, I don't know if there's contact information for me, that's available on that site. But we're kind of, here's an immediate conundrum. If I want to reach out to her, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, you got a phone number here, and she has your email address from the meeting invitation. And
I think her name was Hillary.
Hillary, yes.
Why don't you both email Steve, and then Steve can set up the speed dating or whatever this is. But if you both email one person, then he can kind of share that contact.
Yeah,
I think,
and we can do that too. Be glad to facilitate that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And
hey, Steve,
Pam, you had your hand up?
Whoops, hold on. Is that Randy?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. I'm sorry, Steve. I wanted to respond to Abby. I don't cover Grand Traverse area, but we can certainly get, Steve Kittler, the RRD supervisor down there involved. And Ann Emmington in Cadillac is actually the project manager dealing with that. So just wanted to let people know.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
I just wasn't sure if Steve or any of our other Cadillac District staff are on.
Well, can I, this is Dan from Grand Traverse County again. Yeah. You could always contact me at the health department, and I can connect you. I have all the contact information from distributing water and just reaching out to folks. So yeah, I can be the go-between person there too. So
okay, awesome.
Dan, do you know if there was an actual, distribution list set up for those residents that were getting water or to connect to the
Oh,
greater
yes.
resident area? Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have, yep. Yeah, there's a lot of lists.
I figured that.
Thank you. All right, then let's go to Pam.
One of the things, Steve, that I want to bring up is if you remember in December of last year, I spoke about having some type of identification for the COG members. On the front line, being out here, and most of the COG knows that I've been out with Eagle in my area every time we've done soil testing and water sampling. Gail Dugan, as well, is very active out here with me. And it would be nice if there was some type of information that Eagle could put together for us as members with some type of identification, because when we show up and we're on the front line out here with these people, you don't hear from them or you're not making close contact with them as what we do, but try to calm the fears. I've been out with Eagle several times when people refuse for us to get on their property to test. Eagle was there for their safety, but they didn't want to know, because it was going to, hurt the value of their home, and what they didn't know, they didn't have to disclose. But my point that I'm trying to make is, and I think that I'd like to hear from some of the other COG members, is I think that it is imperative that we know you need to load our lips from Eagle. What do we say to these people? They're not going to have an opportunity to make the contact with you as they do the liaisons out here in the impacted communities. So what can you do to help us, and how can we better serve your agency by trying to keep the panic down?
Thanks, Pam. And I know we won't solve that here tonight, but I think that is really a good question to throw first at like Ken's work group, his subcommittee, because we're talking right now about some of this, local outreach to residential well owners, for example. And so, Ken, I hope you're taking notes there as well. And Pam may be volunteering to be on your subcommittee.
I knew that was coming, Steve, when you said that.
That's a really good point, though, Pam, and I appreciate your interest in helping out.
Well, I just think that, like, as I say, we're out here with the community, and I know that I've had over 2 years experience with this now in an impacted community, and people are afraid. They have no comprehension of what does this mean, where does it go from here. But again, another problem that as I pose is there has to be some type of identification that Eagle's going to allow their COG members to have, so that people know we are someone legitimate. Some people don't want to talk.
Yeah.
Because they don't know who they're talking to. So, but thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. And I see Bill Barnett, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I'd just like to circle back. Thanks, Steve. The individual that spoke from Traverse East Bay, Hillary, has helped us understand what the background and lead up was. And that was my question that I put in the comments. I'm just curious what the lead up was. And it does sound like there was a letter sent either to the airport or from, it sounds like to the airport, identifying 25 homes. And if that were the case, I mean, this would be an obvious case for the state to reach out in advance. It's a small group. I wondered how this slipped through the policy. And I think the committee would benefit from seeing in writing the back and forth of what happened to start this off. So not even the small committee, but the whole group here. I mean, we're all interested in fixing mistakes. It sounds like it was. And all of us live in communities. We wouldn't want to see this happen in our community. And I think this is an important study example to fix future problems and make things go easier for Eagle. If they had 25 homes, knew about it, I mean, that would have been so easy to go test 25 homes, or however many people would allow them to do that. And this thing could have been cut short much faster. I just would like to know more about the lead up and the background. I'd asked to share that with the committee in writing and show us a little file of what happened and how we can avoid this in the future. But it wasn't just a general concern for the region. It sounds like it was bullet pointed, or at least targeted rather, right at a group of houses. I mean, and there's probably other situations in Michigan with homes or businesses or whatever right in the vicinity of concern areas. I don't know what the concern was in February that led a letter to go out, and if it was Governor Whitmer and changing policies, excellent. She's on the right track here. But it would make more sense, I think, in the future, if you've got a limited group, and just get out there and talk to them immediately. Don't worry about panic. I know we're trying to do that, but I was hoping to get more of the lead up so the committee, the whole group here would understand what happened and how we can fix that and make sure it's fixed moving forward so we can make this, excuse me, committee proactive and effective and help the state as you're serving us. I mean, you guys are all citizens with families too. You feel, I'm sure, the same way. But whatever policy's in the way of this has got to end. And we've got to have a better system in place to wake up people, move them in the right direction, and awareness. If it's water for 8 months, whatever. And I know we're in a pandemic and there's issues there, but I think we should have supplied them water and at least started testing immediately their water and not be worried about what's over at the airport first. We go to the airport second. But I'd just like to see everything that was in writing that went back and forth. I think would help our whole group to understand that. And I wouldn't have known that 25 homes were on there had the individual not brought that up. And I can see why they're upset, because that's a narrow group that should have been clearly notified. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. Looking forward to Ken's committee taking the first stab at some of that. So he'll have a lot of help from Eagle and DHHS staff along the way. So appreciate that. Charlie, you had your hand up? Charlie, you're on
Yes.
mute if you're trying
Sorry,
to.
sorry, that was a mistake.
I think that was a leftover.
Gotcha. And then Ken, you probably raised your hand when I was asking if you were taking notes.
Exactly. I reflected on the discussion, and there wasn't a whole lot that was said tonight we haven't experienced before. The delays are significant, but I just wanted to reinforce the fact we're not going to be able to do this with just 3 volunteers or 4 volunteers. And long ago, we established our mission statement, and I just want to read this to folks so that they understand that we can work together to get this communication out to folks. Our mission statement is develop strategies and make recommendations to MPART on informing and empowering residents impacted by PFAS contamination. It's pretty simple, but we need everybody that can help us step up, and we need to help MPART and Eagle not have 8-month delays. That was my immediate reaction when I saw that report, that we went through that here in Rockford and Belmont. We shouldn't be there now. And there's a lot of mitigating reasons for that, but they're willing to work and listen. And even the Department of Health is there. They come to all these committee meetings too. There's more state people at our meetings than there are volunteers. So
we appreciate your leadership.
That's my message, and I ran out of ink.
Well said, though. Thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate it. Looking forward to some continued discussions coming out of your subcommittee and bringing it back to the full committee here to figure this out. So thank you. All right. So my fault here. Apologies. I've let us kind of get a little off schedule on the agenda, but been looking forward to having Ian come in and talk a little bit about what's going on with implementation of the new drinking water standards for PFAS. So Ian, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve. All right, I'm going to share my screen so I can follow my notes, if you don't mind. And we'll go with trial and error. Hopefully this will work. Okay. All right, please let me know, do you see a title slide or do you see a page with a bunch of notes on it?
Title slide.
All right, great. I've screwed that up enough times that I finally figured out how to make it work. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for letting me come talk to the Citizens Advisory Work Group tonight. I know that, I think it was last month, a handful of questions arose about how the world of drinking water monitoring, the PFAS world of drinking water monitoring, has changed since August, since the promulgation of our state's MCLs has happened. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer tonight, and then I'm going to on the MCLs themselves, and then I'm going to talk a bit about how MPART will continue to do what we've been able to do in the past, which is inform the public on the current state of affairs with PFAS in Michigan's drinking water, related to Michigan's drinking water resources. So my name's Ian Smith. I work in the Eagle Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. I head up our division's Emerging Contaminants Unit. In that capacity, we spent the time between 2018 and 2020 overseeing the state's statewide PFAS sampling survey. And then leading up to August 2020, we were involved in the promulgation of Michigan's PFAS maximum contaminant levels. That's my email address there. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you want to talk PFAS or drinking water or anything else. All right, so during this talk, I'm going to be using a number of abbreviations, so I just wanted to list them here. The one I've already mentioned is MCL, which is maximum contaminant level. In the Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division world, we regulate public water supplies, and those fall into a number of different groups. Two important ones that are going to be part of this presentation are community water supplies, or type 1 public water supplies, and non-community water supplies, or type 2 public water supplies. And then the last abbreviation is ECU, which is the Emerging Contaminants Unit, which is the unit that I work in. All right, so these are them. These are the 7 PFAS MCLs promulgated in the state of Michigan, August of 2020. You're all probably familiar with them by now, but I wanted to reiterate and share them here. I will note the asterisk down there on the 5th one down. Hexafluoropropylene oxide dimer acid is sometimes referred to as Gen X. That's a little bit of a misnomer, but it is a common one. The Gen X name actually applies to a manufacturing process which uses this specific fluorinated compound, as well as some others. So which supplies are subject to these MCLs? Well, I mentioned community public water supplies and non-community public water supplies. More specifically, within that non-community public water supply category, we apply these MCLs to what we call non-transient non-community water supplies. So those are water supplies serving not less than 25 of the same people for at least 6 months out of the year. So some examples here: schools, industries, office complexes. Others might be childcare facilities, adult foster cares, etc. So we're focusing on water being served to the same group of people for at least 6 months out of the year. Community public supplies are probably a little more well understood. These are your large regional supplies, your municipal supplies, condominium complexes. I'm drawing a blank. Correctional facilities. Things of that nature. So these are supplies which provide year-round service to not less than 25 residents or not less than 15 living units. So we'll talk a little bit about how these MCLs are being brought to bear. So between August 3rd, 2020, when they were promulgated, and February 3rd of this year, 2021, we had our initial monitoring period. So every supply who is regulated and falls under these rules took an initial sample and reported those sample results to the state of Michigan. Based on those results, we assigned a ongoing monitoring frequency, a monitoring schedule to all of those supplies. So if those results came in below the reporting limits, that supply went immediately to annual monitoring. If they came in above the reporting limit, so if there was a detection for any of those 7 compounds, that supply was scheduled to perform quarterly monitoring. Once assigned to one of these 2 groups, moving forward, for at least the near future, these are the 2 categories. So I apologize, I was a little bit repetitive. I will note that for annual monitoring, community water supplies are required to submit their samples by September 30th. So those supplies on quarterly monitoring have the opportunity to reduce monitoring frequency based on these criteria. So if they have not already initially been placed into annual monitoring, they have to prove or demonstrate that their results are reliably and consistently below the MCL, at which point they can move from quarterly monitoring to annual monitoring. What does it mean to be reliably and consistently below the MCL? This really depends on a number of factors. What type of supply is this? Is this supply near any known sources of PFAS contamination? That determination is made at the district level by Eagle drinking water analysts. So the supplies are required to report their results in accordance with kind of the existing framework of our other MCLs. So within the first 10 days of the month following the month in which the results are received, within 10 days of the end of the monitoring period, and whichever of these 2 is sooner is the one that applies. So those results come to, so I mentioned community water supplies and non-community water supplies. Community water supplies are submitting those results to the Eagle District offices. Non-community water supplies are submitting their results directly to the local health departments. Those entities then determine compliance, monitoring schedule, communication requirements, etc. The other thing I'll mention is that new systems coming online are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act as well, and these need to demonstrate compliance with the MCL before beginning to serve water to the public. So what does it mean to be over a PFAS MCL versus what does it mean to be in compliance with the MCL? So I'm going to make this distinction. If you're over the level during a single sample, we're going to call that over the PFAS MCL. If your running annual average of samples exceeds the MCL threshold, you are in exceedance of the MCL. It's kind of a subtle difference in language, but it's an important distinction, as you'll see here in a moment. So based on those single MCL, single sample levels over the MCL, the supply may move back to quarterly monitoring or off of quarterly monitoring. All right, so I mentioned that MCL compliance is based on a running annual average. What that means, so for a quarterly sampling schedule where you have 4 consecutive quarterly results, that running annual average is going to be calculated based off of those. So add them together, divide by 4. If that number is above the MCL, that supply is out of compliance. I'll note that there can be a situation where if the supply takes an initial sample and it is exceedingly high, let's say 5 or 6 times the MCL, that supply would immediately be out of compliance because it cannot mathematically be reduced below the MCL with further sampling. Supplies that are out of compliance are required to complete what we call a Tier 2 public notification. This has to be sent out within 30 days and includes a set of mandatory language regarding health effects, among other things determined by the rule. Violations and additionally, all detections are going to be referenced in a community water supplies annual water quality report or consumer confidence report. If a supply is out of compliance with monitoring requirements, they're required to send out what we call a Tier 3 public notice, which has to be posted within 1 year of that violation. So I went through that pretty fast. Hopefully there'll be time for questions, but what I wanted to do in addition to share that with you is talk a bit about how we in Eagle and MPART are going to be utilizing this kind of new reality of compliance monitoring to continue to perform and or continue to share Pfas results with the general public. So as many of you know, beginning in 2018, Eagle conducted this statewide Pfas survey. I apologize, this map is a little out of date. This one is from the first phase of that survey, but it gives you a good sense of how broad that effort was and how many supplies we were able to sample representing the entire state of Michigan. So we chose supplies for that survey that represent about 3/4 of the total population of our state. And by represent, I mean we would be sampling the drinking water supplies for 75% of Michiganders. So the way that this worked, Eagle administered this entire study, so we were able to select the supplies to be sampled. We were able to task our subcontracting partner, AECOM, with scheduling those samples and collecting those samples. All of those samples went to a set of labs chosen by Eagle, and we were able to dictate where those results would come from the lab. So we had them sent directly to us, and it was on our shoulders to share those results both with the general public as well as those individual supplies. And what this allowed us to do was work with our partner agencies within MPART. So we were sharing those results in real time with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. We could make those results available on demand for Eagle leadership and MPART leadership. We were able to make those available on demand for the communication staff within Eagle and MPART as well. And we were able to utilize that large data set to to help develop these PFAS MCLs. We were also able to update the MPART data portal within 48 hours of any new reporting of sample results. We were able to share a distribution map of where those results were occurring. And I was able to bring those results to different public meetings and professional meetings and share those as needed. So as we move into compliance monitoring in the post-MCL world, these kind of positive aspects of what we were able to do kind of get crossed off, and things have changed. So all type 1 and type 2 supplies are now going to have to monitor under the Safe Drinking Water Act. They're able to collect their samples within the defined monitoring periods, so those quarterly or annual monitoring periods as defined by the Safe Drinking Water Act. So they're allowed to collect those samples at any point within that time frame. The public water supplies are able to choose any lab that they would like to work with off of a list of over a dozen certified labs. And results are, instead of coming directly to Eagle and MPART, they're being supplied directly to the public water supply, and they're making their way back to Eagle in a more roundabout way. So it's going to be challenging based on this to make sure we're able to share these with the general public. This is a diagram of what the data flow looks like. So if you imagine your public water supply collecting samples, sending it off to the lab, getting results back. These then go out to all of the different district offices within Eagle. And for non-community supplies, they go off to all of the different county and district health departments, where they are collected and tabulated and placed into 2 separate databases. CIDWIS is the Safe Drinking Water Information System database. That is for community water supplies. WaterTrack is the database for non-community water supplies. What we have managed to do is set up a query that draws information from both of these and makes that information available more centrally. And therefore, we're able, in theory at least, to meet those same needs that I listed on the earlier slide. The only real difference that I foresee is that the public portal, where we share PFAS data with the general public, updating that 48 hours after samples are received is no longer doable. So we are working on a model that's going to make that process as fast as possible. So, but we are planning to, again, be able to provide through the MPART website a resource for all of you and the rest of Michigan's residents to get a snapshot of where we are as far as tracking PFAS in Michigan's drinking water resources. So that's all I have. I know I went really fast, I apologize, but I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. Thanks, everybody.
So Ian, it looks like AJ's got his hand up.
Sure, I'm gonna close my presentation for a moment here. Okay, AJ, what's your question?
Yeah, and it's really just a quick comment rather than a question, and that is, I think that some of the folks on the call may need to know that what you oversee is public water supplies, and that private drinking water wells kind of fall outside of the purview of your direct oversight, and that's about 25% of Michigan citizens. So there's kind of not saying that those wells are being ignored. We've talked about various ways to reach out to them, but kind of falls outside of your discussion today. So just want to let people know.
That's a great point, AJ, and thank you for that. So because Michigan has approximately 1 million private residential wells, our statewide sampling up until MCL promulgation did not include all of those. Those wells were typically sampled instead as part of PFAS site investigations. Since promulgation, AJ's right. These rules, the Safe Drinking Water Act does not, and the PFAS MCLs do not directly apply to private residential wells, and nor does it apply to a certain subset of public water supplies, type 3 public water supplies and transient non-community supplies. So thank you, AJ.
Looks like you've got a question from Connie.
Yep. Hey, Connie.
Yeah, hi, Ann. Could you provide the MPART members here with a list of Eagle certified laboratories that the water supplies are sent, water samples are sent to? And I would like to know, does Vista Analytical Laboratory, are they one of Eagle certified laboratories?
Yes to both of your questions. I will put the list, there are going to be two lists, one for in-state labs, one for out-of-state labs. And to answer your second question, Vista is on that list of out-of-state certified labs.
Well, I have just looked at some PFAS lab analytical reports from Vista.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very surprised to see the results. I think you better do some QA, QC for Vista, because the way their sample results went for the lower Rouge River is they showed that the upstream was heavily contaminated with PFOA, but the downstream, where all the major industry is, was almost none detect. So you better do some QA, QC from Vista Analytical, because and also the recovery rates were not so hot either.
Okay, we can reach out to our laboratory work group. If you've got a particular page, Connie, that you can shoot Steve as a PDF, maybe staff can look into that further, because I think that would take some digging to figure out exactly what the issue might have been.
Well, it's key because it does affect, you know, some people. That one other thing that I would just want to mention here is that Wayne County does have people on residential groundwater wells. So don't automatically assume it. And for example, at one of the landfill sites that's an unlined hazardous waste landfill, we've got 13 different houses on residential wells, and Eagle is not doing anything about that. I'd also like to say, Abby, that it might be a good idea if there would be a way for ordinary people, ordinary, I'm talking about the ones here on the MPART Citizen Advisory Workgroup, could look at lab analytical data on PFAS. We never get to really see that. And I think that's really important. That's my thought.
Okay, thanks, Connie. I think you and I can follow up and have some further discussions on how that would best be presented, but we can certainly explore that option.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks. Shelley, your hands up?
Well, Abby, real quick, I just want to make sure to follow up on one of Connie's comments. The certification list that I did provide links to, that certification is for drinking water analysis only. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks, Abby.
Good distinction on that one. Shelley, you.
Yeah, it's less of a question, more of a comment. Great presentation. I'd like to see a presentation similar to that for the groundwater. Because the promulgation of the new levels also affects groundwater. And while I understand that many of us are here because of our communities having a drinking water impact, there are those of us who are here because we perhaps have a site where there's only an impact to groundwater. So I'd like to see a presentation such as the one we just watched, as it pertains to how the state is handling the sites that just solely have a groundwater impact and not a drinking water impact, so that I can understand what kind of structure is being given to the sites across the state as far as reporting and expectations. If it's being uniformly enacted across the state, if the expectations are being uniformly enforced across the state for the sites that are groundwater impact only. So it's just a comment that I'd like. It was a great presentation. It was very easy to understand. It was easy to follow. And I'd like to see a very similar one for groundwater sites, if possible.
Thank you, Shelley. We'll definitely think about how to best present that, because there would be a lot of information on that one too. So I think Brandy is next.
Hey, Brandy.
Hello. I just wanted to go off that comment a little bit because I remember Steve saying at the last meeting that we were going to be getting PFAS tested in the air. So I was wondering if there was any plan of how that was going to be done, where it was going to be done, and if there was any plans to get it done in Kalamazoo County where there has been known PFAS spills near the wastewater plant and graphic packaging.
Did you hear
clearly the question?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the question.
Yeah, was that about air testing, Brandy? Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, the last meeting, Steve said that we would be possibly testing the air for PFAS. So I was wondering if there was any plan for that, like, or they're going to be planning to test PFAS in Kalamazoo County at all.
Yeah, so Brandy, what that might be a reference to is that we're working with Harvard to potentially participate in some studies and some research on sampling air. There's not a lot of information out there on even how to do it. And so we're trying to figure out a way to coordinate with Harvard researchers on some modeling studies and some sampling. We haven't started doing that yet. I don't know if the samplers where they would all be located either, but that is a study that hopefully we have some information to share back with the COG. And it probably won't be in the next month or so because they haven't even begun the sampling, but that is an item of interest. As you know, there's not a lot of data out there, a lot of research on air emissions, air deposition. So stay tuned for that one.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Bob Pataki, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Am I up, Steve? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to thank Ian Smith for the work that he did on that map in 2018 and coming forward. Just a short story. That map and the data that it contained got me started on a lot of this PFAS investigation, and the raw data showed me more spots in the Brighton area than I could ever imagine, including 2 or 3 within a mile of my house that made it very interesting and necessary to follow up. And it's just, it was a huge help, and it was so different than anything that I had experienced up until that point, and working with local government. I'd add that I had to use the Michigan Radio's website to find some of the maps that actually worked and showed me some of the spots. And when I called my local water supplies asking about it, they were completely, they had no idea what was going on. So PFAS is very new. It's hard to understand, and your mapping and data was a huge help. I'd also add that the private wells, groundwater, and even our fish are being measured today by the state of Michigan for the level of chemicals associated with PFAS in their systems. Having the raw data available to the community if they chose to look in the at one of the websites or one of your MPART resources would be just a huge benefit in allowing us to put all the information together and see the picture of where this chemical is entering our system and how how pervasive it is in our communities. And the last point I'd make is that I've done a lot of work recently on the vaccine distribution. I sincerely hope that you are able to do a much better job. And I would add that vaccines only cost $15, but a PFAS test costs $250 to $700 and takes a lot longer because it's much more precise. So I would add that it's very important that your work gets spread out and get funded. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Yes, thank you, Bob. I'm glad our work inspired somebody.
All right. Well, Ian, thanks very much for your presentation and the Q&A here. Appreciate all the comments, and I think we should try to move on and see if we can get done through the agenda here. Everybody's waiting anxiously for Sandy to talk a little bit about the communication freeway. So, Sandy, the floor is yours.
I don't think anyone's waiting anxiously for this. I think we're waiting anxiously for it to be done. But if you want to put me off to next month, I can. But if you want me to move ahead, I can do that too. So it's up to you guys. So, and it's up to you, Steve, if you want me to keep going. I think the meeting ended 15 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next slide. My name is Sandy Winstelt, and I live in Belmont, Michigan, and was impacted by PFAS from the Wolverine Worldwide Tannery site. So I got involved in this about 5 years ago when I found that out. So nobody signs up for this or does this unless you work for Eagle. The rest of us just do this by chance. What I wanted to talk about today was I was asked by Compass Training, who does a lot of trainings with agencies, to work with them in training EPA staff. And these are mostly remediation staff, scientists, direct staff that are working with communities on how to improve their risk communication. And so I wanted to bring some of that knowledge here, but also pick the brains of all the community members that are on this group to see what else I can work with EPA on and see how we can use this. So I'm glad there's a lot of agency staff here because I'm hoping this will help them with that. And so next slide. Please, hello, next slide. There we go. Okay, so I think when we look at this, I think we all think we see the same thing. But if you really talk about it, we're seeing different things. And I think that's kind of how agencies are with this. Some of us see a road, some of us see a parking lot, most of us see chaos. Next slide, please. Go. But I think when we look at what we're doing, we think we're going down the same road, but this is really kind of what it feels like. I think community members are going to look at this picture and we're going to feel like the buffalo on this road, sort of being herded along by agencies. I think agencies feel like they are the buffaloes on this road and they're being pushed along by community members. I think we can all agree it's the media sitting here taking the picture and watching what's happening. Just a side note, this is actually a vacation picture of mine from many years ago at Yellowstone when we got caught up in a buffalo stampede. Keep in mind there was buffalo in the woods there along the side, but where our car is here, this is my friend taking the picture. I jumped out because I wanted to pet a buffalo. Note to self, don't pet buffalo. They're not nice little kittens. But the point of this picture is to show that perspective is everything. And if we all feel like we're being pushed along and we're not taking the time to listen, that is where the problems come. So next slide. So this is the most important slide of the night, even more important than the MCLs we just heard, which was good. but this is what I want you to see. When scientists talk to people, they tend to talk to other scientists, and they communicate in a very specific way. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to provide all the background information. So they're going to talk about the topic, about everything about PFAS, all the different chemicals, how it's manufactured, 6-chain, 8-chain, where the carbon and oxygen is added. They're going to talk about groundwater and surface water and all of that. Then they're going to talk about how their study occurred, how many samples they got, where the samples were, how deep they were, how they processed it, how they did quality control. And then they're going to give us the results. The problem comes in communities, that is exactly not what we want, typically, especially when you think of like the East Bay area that we talked about with Traverse City. The last thing those people want is this. What people want to hear first in communities is the results. I want to know, is the foam on the lake good or bad? Is the foam on the lake contaminated or not? And if it is, then I want to hear, what does that mean? Does that mean I can't be in the lake? Does that mean I need to rinse the kids off? I need to make sure kids aren't eating it. And then I need all the supporting information. I need you to explain how you decided that and what it was about. And I think this exemplifies kind of how we communicate past each other. Scientists and researchers and most agency people are coming at us with the yellow triangle, and community members need to hear it in the blue triangle. So I want to encourage all the government people to try and speak to us in that blue triangle. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't mean community members, we're not stupid and we're uninformed. I mean, I may be stupid, but for the most part, we are not dumb people. We have fired up that Google machine and we've learned a lot about PFAS. So I'm not telling you this because of that, but what I'm telling you is keep in mind, this is not our day job. We are all working, for the most part, full-time jobs, working with families, having to figure out how to do all this, and then hearing this on the side. This is not what we do primarily for a living. So that's why it's important you communicate with us pretty clearly. So let's go to the next slide because I'm trying to zoom through this. Zoom. So what community members need are three things. We need information that is timely, we need information that is clear, and we need information that is honest. And I don't want any of you to think that I'm saying you're purposely not doing this, but I want you to keep in mind that that is our priorities as community members. Next slide. So when I mean timely, and I feel very strongly about this as someone who learned, sadly, that there had been some thoughts that this area was contaminated for quite some time before we would ever told about it. And you've all heard my story, so I'm not going to bore you with it. But it is better to tell community members about a potential problem than it is to wait until you have all the facts. Because when I know there's a potential problem, I can take and use those strategies to be protective until I know more. And I know I always hear the comment, we don't want people to panic. And I don't know where that myth comes from that communities will panic from this. Go to the next slide, please. So I think it's important, you know, my day job is a psychologist, and people panic when they feel like their life and their family or their property or their well-being is at risk and they have absolutely no control of the situation. But when you understand things as much as you can, then you can plan and act accordingly. Now, this picture is also from my house, and that is a black bear that came to visit me and my husband one year. And we're just north of Grand Rapids, so it's pretty unusual to have a bear in the community. He came, as you can see, he destroyed all my bird feeders around there. I was actually standing on the deck at this point, yelling at him, saying, get off my deck, you can be on the lawn. And I think he was swearing at me as he left, but I'm not for sure. But anyway, what I want you to know is I went then to my neighbors and said, hey, I had a black bear in my yard last night. So, you know, plan accordingly. Now, nobody panicked. Nobody went out and bought guns. Nobody set up, perimeter fences or anything. They just took the precautions they thought were appropriate. Some people thought I was a crazy lady and didn't let me in their yard anymore. Some people kept their kids inside for a while. Some people carried mace when they went running in the morning, but nobody panicked. So I want to use this as an example that I think it's crucial we let communities know this early. When you launch an investigation, you're not doing it because you're bored at Eagle and you have nothing else to do. You're not throwing a dart at a map and saying, where shall we go this week, Bob? Hey, let's go to Goebels. That sounds like fun. You're doing it because you have enough information to think there's a chance that people could be contaminated. So you, I really believe, have a responsibility to let people know. Okay, next slide. People also want to be, we need clear communication, and that means the basic information, and then give us the resources to look at. You need to share it in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's going to be verbal, sometimes it's got to be in writing or through email. There is no one size fits all. It's going to depend on where the community is and the skills and abilities of the people in that community. You got to think of language, you've got to think of capability, you have to think of all of that. And then you have to expect follow-up calls and emails with questions. When they came to my house the first time, I was absolutely blown away. And I must have had 30 questions a day after that. But thankfully, I had some pretty good people at Eagle that kind of helped me with that. Next question. Or next, there we go. And you also have to be honest. And by honest, I mean you have to be honest. You only have one chance to make a first impression. If people find that you were not honest when you communicated information, you will lose all credibility from that point forward. And this is already a situation where people don't tend to trust that government officials are going to do the right thing. So if they catch you doing something and miscommunicating, it's going to be really hard to gain their trust back. So if you make a mistake, simply own it. We all make that. I don't have any issues with that. If you don't know something, just say you don't know. If you know something and can't communicate it, then just say that. Again, I can't stress enough the need for honesty, clarity, and timeliness. Next slide. Phew, there, okay. So I need now, if people can, if anybody's still left on the call, can give me some ideas of what else community members need from agencies or what agencies need from community members to help move this along. That's all I'm going to do for tonight. There, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Any
Was that
thoughts?
fast enough?
No, you did great. No, and this is good stuff. I really appreciate that. Any thoughts here to share with Sandy this evening? And I know we've got her email and phone number if we want to reach out to you between now and the next meeting and as you keep moving forward. So just thanks very much for sharing this. And Abby.
Hello?
I think as Sandy said that, communication is key, making it clear, being honest are all really clear. And it's really interesting to me when you start looking at it from a statewide perspective, how each community is so different. What one community wants, another community doesn't necessarily need. And so some communities, we will send 3-4 different letters trying to get access to people who we think are drinking water that needs to be sampled and no response. Have done town halls, but again, not the response that we would expect. And so I don't know how else for staff to get that kind of word out in some of those types of communities where we have just the opposite problem, where we're trying to reach out through email, health departments knocking on doors, and we've attempted to contact them several times to get them sampled because we want to make sure that they're not drinking impacted water. I'm just going to throw that out to the bigger group. Have you guys got any other ideas on ways to leverage that situation? Because maybe they don't trust the government, but maybe they, could trust a different group.
I think, I hear that a lot. There's a lot of people that are worried about property values. There's a lot of people that have other issues that become competing interests. I think all you can do is what you can do. And if you say to people, there's a chance we need to test your water because there's a possibility of contamination, you have done what you can do. As long as they understand what you're saying and they've gotten the mail. I mean, I know of people that are renting, so the mail goes to the landlord, not to the address. So they don't get the information. So you're right, but every community is very, very different. I think you can use us more for that too, though, because if you have community members that can go and walk with you on that, or reach out to people and say, hey, I was in your boat, here's why it's important, that may help you get some more ideas.
Okay, cool.
Really good point.
Stephanie,
Yeah.
got your hand up?
Yeah, just to echo what Sandy was saying there, and just sort of reminds me of how there's been some hesitancy around vaccines for COVID. And it's not necessarily the messaging that comes from public health departments that has helped people get over that hump. But once they see their peers, other people in their community getting the shot, they go ahead and do the shot too. So it is really helpful to have an understanding of community networks as you are doing risk communication.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right. I think just being mindful of time, and I'm really glad, Sandy, that you hung in there and went through this with us tonight. And I think there'll be more conversation. And you're right. We really do need to leverage the strength of the Citizens Advisory Workgroup members to help MPART figure this out. So, all right. So I think we've already done the subcommittee updates, unless AJ or Ken disagree. I think you both did a really good job at the beginning there, coming off on the early part of the agenda. So unless there's anything else there, I think we can move to the next slide, which will be any community round robin. And again, being pressed for time, I still want to give anybody an opportunity to jump in for anything that you've got for the good of the group that we haven't chatted about tonight.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
This is Hillary again from East Bay Township.
Yes, Hillary.
I just wanted to say that the woman that spoke before, I agree with her wholeheartedly in regards to the communication. I know during our process, there were several times where, as a community member that was affected by PFAS, I felt that I was not being spoken to honestly. And it was more of a case of they didn't know the answer, so they gave me what they thought they knew, and they ended up having to backpedal later on because it wasn't accurate information. I would rather have the truth up front and somebody to tell me, hey, I don't know the answer. I will find out to the best of my ability and get back to you, than to try to backpedal out of it later. Secondly, I'd like to know, I know with PFAS contamination, there is a study, a health study being done down near, I think, Kent County in Michigan. Is there a potential of other studies being opened up for other people such as myself and say my neighbor, to see what our potential health levels are from being impacted by PFAS at such high levels? Because my well tested at 877 ppt.
Thanks, Hillary. And I think Marcus from DHHS is on. If you want to chime in real quick on that question about health studies and exposure studies.
Yeah. So right now so we have the two going on right now. There's nothing currently in the planning stage, but we're constantly evaluating where it might be a possibility. Right now, we don't have the resources to go out to all these individual sites one at a time, but every one we do evaluate.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from any of the members on what's going on in your community? Noteworthy news. All right. And MPART agency updates. I hope all of the MPART agencies that were on here tonight forgive me if I don't give you a lot of time for updates tonight, given the top of the hour here. Is anything critical that we want to make sure that we mention to the Citizens Advisory Work Group? All right. Well, hearing none, I think we'll move on. Oh, congratulations. Oh, thank you. I guess I should look ahead on the slides, huh? You stuck that in there, Kelly.
Yeah, I did stick this in here at the 11th hour because I know that you print these. So I just personally wanted to say congratulations, and for sure, definitely gonna miss you.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you, this team here. I've really appreciated working with you. You guys are awesome, and you inspire me for all of your enthusiasm and strength. And I look forward to hearing from you and following you as time goes on. You've been great, and thanks, Kelly, and Abby as well for kind of taking over the reins here. And appreciate all the MPART agencies joining these calls as well.
Yeah.
And Abby, it's all now officially yours.
That's so scary. Thank you, Steve. And I just want to give everybody the heads up that, you know, having been in MPART from the beginning myself, Steve took over, you know, about maybe 9-10 months into the process of starting up MPART when we didn't have the processes laid out. So it's really because of his unwavering dedication and you know, passion for getting this right that we've been able to come this far. And so I just really appreciate Steve's patience, his calm demeanor, because there's always something that seems to be on fire, whether it's, you know, a hot spot site or some hot topic that we're dealing with. And Steve has always been able to guide this MPART team very well. So it's a credit to his leadership that we have come this far. And so I just really appreciate him.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
yeah, here you go. This is real quick on the meeting previews for next month. I won't be there. Abby will be running the show with Kelly in the background as usual. That's going to be awesome.
That sounds fun. So it looks like we're going to be talking with Tammy on some wildlife ecological studies update, and John Ash with GIS applications. So that will be fun. And COVID. Let's talk about COVID and PFAS. DHHS is going to give that. So we will have lots to talk about there. And a Delta County Airport Town Hall on March 18th, which is already on the MPART calendar. So, oh, and don't be alarmed if you get a cancellation notice for future COG meetings. Kelly's going to put them all under her name and resend the invitation. So don't be alarmed when it looks like you're getting booted off the list and it, you know, and off of the COG. Any final words, Kelly?
No final words. I think that's it.
Excellent. Excellent. It's only 8:05. We're only a little bit behind the times, but we'll see if we can do any better next month with keeping us on schedule. So everybody have a good night and congratulations to Steve. Yay.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks.
Have a good night. Congratulations.
Is it a deal between you and me, Steve, to see who's the last one to click off?
I was always curious who's on these at the end, so I figured I'd stick on, and so it turns out it's you, huh?
Yeah, it's always me because I want to check the chat board to see if something's going on that somebody needs to follow up on.
That's important.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, I'll leave you to follow up on any of those that you might find because my phone's ringing.
Okay. See you later.
Thanks, Mike.